Hello friends. So in this video we will talk about the skeletal muscles and their structure. First of all, what are skeletal muscles? Now skeletal muscles are those muscles which are attached to the skeleton. Skeletal muscles are attached to skeleton by means of a fibrous connective tissue called as tendon. Now, as we know that skeletal muscles, these muscles, skeletal muscles, they are also called as the striped muscles. These are called striped muscles because they appear to have the alternate dark and white bands. So when viewed under microscope, these will show alternate dark and light bands, which gives them the striped appearance, because of which they are called as striped muscles. These muscles are also called as the voluntary muscles. They are named so because they are under the voluntary control of a person. So they are under voluntary control. For that reason, they are also called as voluntary muscles. Now, as far as the structure of skeletal muscle is concerned, if we see a skeletal muscle, each skeletal muscle is formed of bundles of muscle cells called as muscle fibers, which called as the fascicles. So let me draw a structure of a skeletal muscle. So suppose this is one skeletal muscle. This skeletal muscle will be formed of several bundles of muscle fibers. Those bundles of muscle fibers are called as fascicles. So as you can see, I am drawing those fascicles. So I am here drawing some 3 fascicles. Each fascicle will be formed of several muscle cells. Individual muscle cells are called as muscle fibers. So what I am drawing here are the muscle cells or muscle fibers. And one bundle of muscle fiber is called as fascicle. So here I have drawn, suppose, these 3 fascicles. So these are fascicles. Now fascicles are surrounded by a sheath of connective tissue which is called as the Epimysium. So each fascicle will be surrounded by a sheath of connective tissue called as Epimysium. And the individual muscle fiber within each fascicle is surrounded by another sheath of connective tissue which is called as Endomysium. So what I am drawing in this black are the Endomysiums of the muscle fibers. So each muscle fiber will be surrounded by Endomysium. So this is the Endomysium, and these are the individual muscle fibers. Now the entire muscle is surrounded by another sheath of connective tissue which is called as the Epimysium. So this outermost sheath that surrounds the entire muscle is called as the Epimysium. So here it is Epimysium, right? So now if we take one muscle fiber out and study its structure, it will be having following structure. Now we will talk about the structure of individual muscle fiber. So here now the structure of muscle fiber, skeletal muscle fiber. So muscle fiber is the name given to the muscle cell. Muscle cells are called as muscle fibers because of their shape, elongated shape. That is why they are called as muscle fibers. Now let us see the structure of the individual muscle fiber. If we see an individual muscle fiber, a skeletal muscle fiber, it is having a cylindrical shape. So these skeletal muscles or the voluntary muscles, they are cylindrical in outline, number one, and they are the cell membrane of the muscle fiber is called as sarcolemma. So they will be lined by sarcolemma, and sarcolemma is nothing but the cell membrane of muscle fiber. So here for the cell membrane of muscle cell, a specific term is used which is called as sarcolemma. Similarly, the cytoplasm within this sarcolemma is called as sarcoplasm. In other words, cytoplasm of a muscle fiber is called as the sarcoplasm. So here is the sarcoplasm. And as far as this cell organelles are concerned, the mitochondria present in the sarcoplasm, they are given specific name, they are called as the sarcosomes. So let me draw them in green. Suppose these are the green mitochondria present within the sarcoplasm, and these are called as sarcosomes. So sarcosomes are the mitochondria of muscle fibers. So these are sarcosomes. Sarcosomes are the mitochondria of the muscle cell. Similarly, the endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, that is called as sarcoplasmic reticulum. So here I am again writing that the endoplasmic reticulum, let me draw that in purple color. Suppose the sarcoplasmic reticulum of a muscle fiber will be called as sarcoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum of muscle fiber is called as sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarcoplasmic reticulum are the endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cell. Now, apart from these cell organelles, there are other cell organelles as well present in muscle fiber, but the most important feature of the skeletal muscle is the presence of longitudinally arranged fibers called as myofibrils. So if we observe a muscle fiber, it will be having longitudinally arranged structure fibers which are called as the myofibrils. So here what I am drawing are the longitudinally arranged fibers which are present throughout the sarcoplasm of the muscle fiber called as myofibrils. So these are the myofibrils. One more important feature of these cells is that these muscle fibers, skeletal muscle fibers, they are syncytial, or in other, syncytial means that they are multinucleated. So there will be present many nuclei, and these nuclei are usually present towards the periphery. So nuclei, multiple nuclei are present within the muscle fiber of a skeletal muscle, and these nuclei are present towards the periphery. Now if we observe if we take out one myofibril from the muscle fiber, it is formed of certain type of proteins which are called as the protein filaments. So if we observe a muscle fiber, if we take out a myofibril from a muscle fiber, we will see that these are myofibrils. Myofibrils are formed of protein filaments. So myofibrils, these are formed of protein filaments. And two types of protein filaments are found in myofibrils. So further, it is being observed that the protein filaments of which myofibril is formed are of two types. Two types of protein filaments are present in the myofibrils. Some filaments are thicker and those filaments are therefore called as the thick filaments. So those filaments which are thick, those are called as thick filaments, while as the filaments which are thinner, those are named as such as the thin filaments. So the two types of filaments that form the myofibril are thick filaments and thin filaments. Now let us see the distribution of these thick and thin filaments within the myofibril. So if we observe a myofibril, here the thick and thin filaments has the following distribution. So there is present a line which is called as the Z line. So here what I am drawing is the Z line. The thin filaments, they arise from the Z line, just like this. So these are the thin filaments arising from the Z line. It's like this. This is one Z line, this is another Z line, and here is the thin filament arising from each Z line. And in between these thin filaments are present the thick filaments. So in between the thin filaments are present the thick filaments, just like this. So what I am drawing in red are the thick filaments. So these are here again the thin filaments. This is the thin filament, right? So here what I am drawing are the thick filaments, just like this. So this is how these thick and thin filaments are distributed. So I will now label them. So here this is called as the Z line. I will talk about more about this later. So this is the Z line. These are the Z lines, and these are the thin filaments. So these are thin filaments. Thin filaments, and what I have drawn in red, they are the thicker filaments. They are the thicker of the two, therefore named as the thick filaments. So here these are the thick filaments. These are thick filaments, and the line from which these thin filaments arise, this is called as the Z line. So here is the Z line. Z line I have already labeled this. Z line I have already labeled. This is Z line. So there is one more thin line that is present that crosses, bisects the thick filaments. That line is called as the M line. So a thin, very thin line bisects, there is thick filaments in the middle, and this line is called as the M line. This line is called as M line. Right? So the distance between two consecutive Z lines, so here one Z line, here is another Z line, this is another Z line. The distance between the two consecutive Z lines is called as sarcomere. The distance between two Z lines, as you can see, and there is the distance from this Z line up to this Z line. This is called as the sarcomere. This is called as sarcomere. So what is sarcomere? Sarcomere is the distance between two Z lines. So I will write down, it is the distance between two adjacent Z lines of a myofibril. So if we see that the arrangement of these thick and thin filaments gives rise to two types of the bands. The first band that appears when we would under light microscope, that appears light in color and therefore is called as the eye band. Eye band is that region which consists of only thin filament. So if I can shade here, so this very portion which is formed of only the thin filaments, this portion will be called as the eye band. So this is the eye band portion. Eye band portion is formed of only thin filaments or actin or the thin filaments alone, while as the portion that is for the region that is formed of both thin and thick filaments, just like this portion will be called as the A band or the dark band. The distribution of these two types of bands, these two types of filaments gives rise to two types of the bands. Number one is the eye band. Eye band is also called as isotropic band. It is named so, it is called as isotropic band because it is formed of only thin filaments. So only thin filaments are present here. It is formed of only thin filaments. Only thin filaments are found in the isotropic band. So therefore it appears lighter in appearance. So it is lighter band. So this is the lighter band. So it will appear as light band. Alternately, the other band which is formed of both thin filament as well as thick filament. Here thin filament as well as thick filament, because both types of filaments are present in this type of band. Therefore it is called as A band. A stands for anisotropic band. So another band found in the myofibril is the A band. A band is also called as an isotropic band. An isotropic band is formed of both thick filaments and thin filaments. So it is formed of thick filaments and thin filaments. So you can observe, so if I will redraw these two types of structures in a simpler form, suppose I will draw here one myofibril. So when we observe this myofibril, it will be having alternate light and dark band. Suppose this is the one band, this will be the dark band. Suppose this is the dark band or the A band. This is dark band or A band. I am drawing the dark or A band. This alternates with the light band or the eye band, just like this. So in case of a muscle myofibril, the light and dark bands, they alternate with each other. Now this light band and the dark band is called as A band. This band will be here called as A band, and this light one will be called as the eye band, right? Now if we observe in the middle of each A band, in each A band is present a lighter region. In the middle of this A band is present a lighter region. That lighter region is called as H zone. So in the middle of each A band is present a lighter region. Here the lighter region, so let me zoom it a bit. So here this is called as H zone. So here this is the H zone. Similarly, in the middle of each eye band will be a dark line. In the middle of each eye band, in other words, each eye band will be bisected by a line. That line is called as the Z line. Here we will see that the middle of each eye band is bisected by a line. This line is called as the Z line. This is called as the Z line. Z line, right? So this, if we see that the distance between two, I said that the distance between two adjacent side lines is called as the sarcomere. So this distance between the two Z lines is called as sarcomere. So this sarcomere will therefore be formed of sarcomere, which is the distance between two Z lines. This will be formed of, you can see in the diagram, it will be formed of 1/2 of I band. So the sarcomere is formed of 1/2 of I band, then one full A band plus one full A band, and number third, there will be the another half of the another I band, and again 1/2 of another I band, So sarcomere is actually called as the structural and functional unit of the muscle fiber. So sarcomere is the structural and functional unit of the myofibril as well as muscle fiber. So this is the contractile unit of a skeletal muscle is actually the sarcomere. When sarcomeres contract, when all the sarcomeres of a myofibril contract, then the entire muscle fiber will contract, and when the entire fibers of a muscle contract, the entire muscle will contract. Now, as far as the distribution of these I and A bands is concerned, their distribution is such that each thick band is surrounded by 6 thin filaments. Each thick filament is surrounded by the 6 thin filaments, and each thin filament is surrounded by 3 thick filaments. So let me draw them just like this. So distribution will be such that each thick filament is surrounded by, so I will draw this thick filament in green. Suppose this is the thick filament. Each thick filament is actually surrounded by 6 thin filaments, and each thin filament is surrounded by 3 thick filaments, just like this. So these are, suppose I will explain this point. Suppose this is a central thick filament, green one. This thick filament is surrounded by the 6 thin filaments here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this one is 6. So each thick filament has 6 thin filaments adjacent to it, right? Similarly, each thin filament, suppose this thin filament here, this thin filament, it will be surrounded by 3 thick filaments, just like this. 3 thick filaments. So each thick filament is surrounded by 6 thin filaments, and each thin filament is surrounded by 3 6 filaments. This is when we observe it in when we observe the 3-dimensional view of this myofibril. What we will observe is that each thick filament will be surrounded by 6 thin filaments, and each thin filament will be surrounded by only 3 thick filaments. Now, as far as these protein filaments are concerned, these thick and thin filaments are concerned, these are formed of the proteins. Now, what are the proteins of the muscle fiber? That we will see in the next video. Thank you.